When it comes to the horror genre, it's tricky to know for sure who is going to be an ally and who is going to end up being an enemy. And parents are rarely an exception to this rule. In honor of Mother's Day, we're going to be looking at some of the most iconic horror movie moms and trying to figure out which ones truly have the best intentions when it comes to their children. Welcome to Blood Binge. I'm Sloan, and this is Horror Movie Moms Good to Evil. For this list, we'll be covering the more notable mothers in some well-known horror films. We're going to be taking into account how these women behave towards their own children. While they might be ruthless killers, we're going to largely consider how they take the needs of their offspring into consideration. So, for all intents and purposes, we're weighing our rankings strongly towards motherly love. As usual, we're starting with the most pure and noble character and working our way down. These are the good moms. Taking the gold medal for most good mom, we have Seong Kyung from Train to Busan. This is a more recent movie, but we had to mention her. The pregnant wife of Sang-hwa, she is the woman that is seen taking care of the young Suan for most of the film. One of the only survivors at the end, she had to endure watching her husband become one of the infected and had to protect Suan, becoming the only person who could take care of the young girl with the father dying protecting them. Not to mention, Seong Kyung was one of the most resourceful of the inhabitants of the train when the infection broke out, being the first to realize that if they could stay away from the zombies' view, they would be less likely to attack the doors. She was also the one to hold off the infected while keeping Suan safe with her in the small bathroom stall, calling her husband to let them know where they were. Taking the silver medal for good mom is the withered mother herself, Jean Kritikos. 13 Ghosts featured a lot of tormented spirits, but Jean's story was unique. She met her end not seeking glory or gaining revenge, but through a tragic accident. We learn that she was left behind in a house fire when her husband Arthur went to save their children, thinking that Jean would run outside on her own. Unfortunately, she died later in the hospital. Though Jean wasn't the one to save her children during the fire, she did make a point of trying to reach them as they wandered the mansion, warning them that they needed to leave and trying to steer them away from the more vile ghosts that lingered, trapped by Cyrus. Even Cyrus admitted that Jean stood apart in his collection. She wasn't likely to harm anyone and only met the criteria he needed because she just barely endured the degree of suffering he needed. We're giving the bronze medal for good mom to Karen Barclay. Trying to be a good mother for her son Andy, she tries to make up for his birthday present by getting him the good guy doll he had been wanting.
Wow, he's something, isn't he?
Though the toy was normally too expensive, she didn't hesitate when she got the chance to buy it at half price from a peddler outside of the store where she worked. Karen had one of the roughest routes for a mom in a horror film. She had to deal with not only losing people close to her because of a murderous doll, but the ordeal left her having her son put under observation at the hospital and fighting to not have him taken away from her. When Karen caught on that Andy was telling the truth about Chucky, she put her safety at risk numerous times to regain Andy's freedom. Next on our list from the film adaptation of Cujo is Donna Trenton. Though she wasn't the best wife, having had an affair right before all the crazy events of this story took place, she was a devoted mom. When she and her son Tad are face to face with the rabid and crazed dog, it leads to the two of them being trapped in the car for 3 days, trying to avoid being attacked.
Can he get us in here?
Which is not something that can be easily fathomed now with the use of cell phones. That definitely would have come in handy in this situation. After those 3 days, Donna's fear for Tad's well-being leads to her overcoming her fear and facing Cujo head-on. How she kills Cujo, though, and her ending plays out changed based on whether you read the book or stick to the movie. In the film, she fights the dog off with a baseball bat before shooting him and saving her son from dying of dehydration. However, in the book, things aren't so fortunate. Next, from The Shining, is Wendy Torrance. For a large portion of the film, Wendy is seen as forgiving and patient of Jack and his temper, making excuses for him wherever she could. But she also knew better than to trust Jack alone with their son Danny, and often competed with her husband for her son's attention. Though she is initially easy to brush off as a doormat of a character, she steps up to protect her son, making sure Danny is able to escape Jack's rampage even if it meant she was left behind to face him. Next, we have a character from the classic The Omen, Catherine Thorne. From the very beginning of her story, we see that motherhood is not going to be an easy ride for her. She loses her child after giving birth, and her husband adopts another in its place, lying to her that the new child was her son. When Damien turns 5, tragedy and mishaps plague the family, as Kathy's best friend hangs herself, and Damien's presence causes numerous animals at the zoo to either flee or attempt to attack him. Slowly, she begins to realize that Damien is the Antichrist and tries distancing herself from him.
Would you just get him out of here, please?
Damien attempted to kill her once by ramming his tricycle into her and causing her to fall from the balcony and suffer quite a few major injuries. Antichrist or not, how did Damien manage to get permission to ride a bike in the house? While Kathy is recovering, she makes the call to move as far away from Damien as she can, which probably makes her one of the most sensible mothers in horror. With that said, we've arrived at the neutral territory. These moms fall in the gray area. We're starting out the gray area with a character from Pet Sematary, Rachel Creed. Another character from the realm of Stephen King. She wasn't exactly the most heroic, nor was she the most sinister. She was your typical mother for a larger part of the movie, caring for her children and trying to be supportive of her husband. After their young son Gage passed away, Rachel took their daughter to stay with Rachel's parents, only returning when she received a premonition of what was to occur. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to be of much help, and instead became a victim of the now undead Gage wreaking havoc. And the original film ends with Rachel being buried and resurrected in the same way her son had been. Now, Rachel admitted to herself that she wasn't the best person. She revealed to Lewis that she had grown up wishing for her sister Zelda's demise, as she had become afraid of her. But we don't hold that against Rachel. Considering the time this story was taking place, it made sense that Rachel would be frightened of Zelda, with anyone suffering from any sort of sickness being stigmatized. Anyone who watched this film growing up most likely vividly recalls the image of Zelda taunting Rachel. King had a habit of having disturbing imagery, and this was one of the worst. Next up is from the film Us, Adelaide Wilson. We're often told while growing up that we're our own worst enemy, but this movie took the saying to a whole new level with the reveal of those known as the Tethered. Adelaide's double red explains that they are able to feel everything that the other does, but are unable to feel any of the same emotions.
We've been waiting for this day.
They're the result of a failed cloning process that was begun as a way to slowly gain control of the American people by having these lifeless doubles kill off the person they're meant to replace. Though this project was abandoned, the Tethered still lingered around. We then learned that Red is in fact the real Adelaide and not the double as we originally were led to believe, with the two having switched places when Adelaide was a young girl, meaning that she was the one responsible for the events that would unfold. Next, we have the bride of the demented doll herself, Tiffany Valentine. For this entry, we're putting a special focus on Seed of Chucky. After she and Chucky were revived by their soon-to-be child, Tiffany takes an immediate liking to them. Though during her life she had an attraction for death, dating Chucky even when he was alive as Charles Lee Ray, she insists on putting an end to their killing since it upset their child so much.
Promise me, Chucky, no more killing.
For being a homicidal doll, Tiffany was surprisingly affectionate towards the child she called Glenda. Even when Chucky had decided to stay a doll, Tiffany continued on with the plan to transfer her soul into Jennifer's body, taking her child with her and separating its soul into the twins, one Glenn and one Glenda. When we see her 5 years later, still raising her twins, Tiffany beats her babysitter to death after the girl insists she's too afraid of Glenda to continue working for the family. If that's not protective overkill, we aren't sure what is. Next is one of the most classic slasher movie killers, Miss Pamela Voorhees. There is no denying that Miss Voorhees is psychotic. In the original Friday the 13th, she's responsible for a lot of killing. And since we've already done a pretty in-depth breakdown of her character in our Friday the 13th Good to Evil, let's change it up and throw in a little info from the comic series Friday the 13th, Pamela's Tale. Pamela is already unstable before her son is even born, claiming that she could hear her unborn child telling her to commit violent acts on others. When her son Jason was born, Pamela insisted that he was perfect, even with all the physical deformities he suffered from, always showing support though being overprotective.
Oh, my sweet, innocent Jason.
However, it's one thing to help raise your son's self-esteem, it's another to tell him it was okay murdering innocent kittens. all because she would always protect him from anyone that may wish to punish or hurt him in any way. After Jason drowns at Camp Crystal Lake, Pamela loses it and begins her vengeful hunt of camp counselors, blaming them for her son's death as they should have been watching him. Even during her rampage, she was spurred by the voice of her son that she thought she heard, encouraging her killing spree.
Kill her, Mommy. Kill her.
Miss Voorhees was clearly an unfit mother, but she did love her son. Next, we have the matriarch, Mother Firefly. Shown in the Rob Zombie films House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects, she takes a leading role in the family, aiding in the murder and disposal of the numerous victims that found their way too close to their home.
Wait! I want to say goodbye.
She provided coverage for her family as they made their escape. After she was arrested, since she was unsuccessful in taking her own life, she refused to expose her children's hiding place. Instead, she antagonized Officer Winnell, purposely driving him to take her life after she used the murder of Winnell's brother to make him lapse in judgment. Finally, we've reached the dark side. These moms are the bad and the evil. First up for this section, we have the mother from Hellraiser, Julia Cotton. Shown in the first film of the series, she is the stepmother to the main protagonist, Kirsty, and takes the role as the supporting villain in the film. When Frank is nourished by Larry's blood, he's quick to try and persuade Julia to help him find more blood to revive himself. While Julia isn't all too sure of the idea at first, she caves when Frank brings back memories of their affair and uses Julia's affection for him to talk her into luring victims into the home.
I'm going to live and you're going to help me, yes?
Yes.
Including Julia's husband and stepdaughter. Next, from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, we have Ann Sawyer. She was typically portrayed as a dangerous woman, but among the various films and comics, she was also shown to have a lovable and protective nature for her sons. The most popular appearance she had was in Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, where though she's featured as a frail older woman, she's still a force that carries the family up until she meets her end. She took care of Grandpa Sawyer despite the abuse she suffered from him at his hand, and took an active part in the killing and feeding of anyone that dared come too close to her family. But though she took care of her sons, she had a very depraved method of doing so, teaching them that a life of brutality and violence was the only way they would survive. Next is one of the most well-known names among the cult classics, Norma Louise Calhoun Bates. The most terrifying thing about Norma was that she was based on a real person, the mother of the infamous serial killer Ed Gein, Augusta Wilhelmine Gein. Like Augusta, Norma raised her son in near isolation and taught him that all women, except for herself, were whores and that anything sexual was sinful.
Go. Yes, go. Mama's little girl.
She was emotionally manipulative up until the day an enraged Norman poisoned her. Next, we have Carrie's mother, Margaret White. Margaret was a nightmare of a parent and brutally abused Carrie when the poor girl should have had at least a safe home to return to. Margaret was able to hide a large part of her illness from the rest of the world by isolating herself from others and using religion as a weapon.
Come to your closet and pray, ask to be forgiven.
Most of the time, literally. Margaret even hurt herself to get Carrie to go along with her twisted teaching methods. At the very least, we can say she was committed to it, but frankly, she should have been committed in another fashion. Now, let's award some medals, starting with your saints. The gold, silver, and bronze medals of good go to Seong Kyung, Jean Kritikos, and Karen Barclay, respectively. Our greatest sacrifice medal goes to Catherine Thorne. This woman lost her child, her best friend, and eventually her very life. She fought hard to distance herself from the threat Damien was becoming, but her efforts just fell short. As far as our sinners medals go, the gold, silver, and bronze medals of evil go to Ann Sawyer, Norma Bates, and Margaret White, respectively. The cruelest kill. We're going to have to give this to Mother Firefly. When she's being interrogated after her arrest, she reveals that she was the one to kill Officer Winnell's brother, resulting in Winnell stabbing her to death in his grief. Up until the very end, she insisted on trying to taunt Winnell in a way that made it clear she thought she came out on top, going out without revealing any of the information the officer really wanted. The worst betrayal medal is granted to Mrs. Cotton. She sacrificed her husband and attempted to do the same with her stepdaughter to revive the man that she had once had an affair with. We'll also be granting her the Darwin Medal, since her sentiment for a crazed man is what eventually did her in, resulting in her also becoming a mass of skinned organs that became almost iconic. And finally, our 7 Deadly Sins medals. We're granting the Lust Medal to Norma Louise Calhoun Bates, who had the depraved habit of wrestling with her son Norman in the very inappropriate fashion, undressing to the bare minimum and then scolding her young confused son for becoming aroused. Though she claimed to be repulsed by anything sexual, she certainly had no problem using it as a punishment or weapon. Lots of problems there. Next up, we're giving the Sloth Medal to Mother Firefly. After all, she's the whole reason they were able to be caught off guard and arrested when the police surround them as a family sleeping. Which was honestly one of the most relatable openings to a movie. Seeing them curse while trying to fight to get somewhat dressed before grabbing their guns was oddly hilarious. It was a hard one to call, but we're going to concede the Envy Medal to Adelaide Wilson, since she had used her double as a way to escape her life, only to reappear later on and try to gain her new family that the double had built. The Pride Medal and Wrath Medal we're both awarding to Margaret White for her abuse that stemmed from her delusions and her insistence that she was the only one capable of living a life that rose above sin. She was so far gone, she not only inflicted pain on her child, but on herself, just to guilt Carrie into listening to her misguided ranting. Even up until the very end, she tried getting Carrie under her thumb, and is quite possibly one of the only characters to still look frightening as they're being killed. The Greed Medal has to go to Tiffany Valentine. Not only did she try resurrecting her lover Charles, gathering the pieces of his doll body, but she fought to claim Jennifer's as her own after being reunited with Glenda. Tiffany wasn't going to allow anything to stand in her way once she had a means of regaining a somewhat normal human life. And finally, the Gluttony Medal is being awarded to Anne Sawyer. Being a member of the Sawyer family, she participated in the murder and cannibalism of numerous people that crossed their paths, and even supported the idea of feeding people in the form of chili to others during the cook-off competitions in one of the earlier 1970s tellings of the story.
I got a real good eye for prime meat.
But what do you think? Who are the most good and evil horror movie mothers? Let us know in the comment section. Do us a huge favor and like this video, as well as hit the notification bell so you know whenever we upload a new video to BloodBinge, where we satisfy your thirst for all things horror. Thanks for watching.